Hey, family, welcome to another great episode of Transformed and Renewed. Listen, I just want to give a shout out to you for joining us today. This is your first time or you are returning. It does not matter. Make sure that you are subscribed to our channel at Robody1212. That is Robody1212. So today we are going to be talking about sweeteners, sugars, and your health. And so there are a lot of questions and even topics around these two when it comes to sweeteners and sugars. And so, what I usually like to do is provide the definition because I think once we start to talk about terms, it's important for us to really understand these definitions before we really get to the crux of what we're trying to deal with. So, when it comes to sweeteners, you have different types. You have low calorie, you have artificial, then you have what is known as non-nutritive. And most of these, whether it's artificial, low calorie, they typically fall into the non-nutritive sweetener class, meaning they don't provide a nutritional benefit. But when you think about sweeteners, they are typically compounds that are developed in the lab. And again, from their name sweeteners, they really have a lower caloric intake compared to sugar. And so usually they can be anywhere from 100, 200 plus times sweeter than sugar. And so you can imagine if you were to use, whether it's like a teaspoon or a tablespoon of sugar, the sweetness that you would get from that, you can probably multiply that by 100 times for a sweetener. And so this is pretty much why you have some people who use sweeteners because they don't want to get the extra calories from sugar. And so, on the other hand, when you think about sugar, this is usually composed of monosaccharides in its simplest form. And we know that sugar can be in the form of glucose, galactose, and fructose, as well as when you think about sucrose, lactose, as well as maltose. Okay. And so those are usually on the latter end are going to be your complex sugars. And so the first ones, like I said, glucose, fructose, and galactose, these are usually your simple sugars. And so when we think about sugars compared to sweeteners, why do people even choose one over the other to begin with? So, like I would talk about with sweeteners, again, it's because they are sweeter, but they contain less weight or calories. But when you think about sugar, for a lot of people, it is pretty much the real deal for them because when you taste a sweetener, it's not giving you that imitation feeling, but you can actually uh, compared to a sugar, it's not giving you that imitation feeling. You actually know, okay, this is real sugar. And some people actually just like that taste. And one of the things that you can get from a sweetener that you may not have known is what is called as a hormone release called dopamine. And dopamine, of course, is like a neurotransmitter and it acts like a hormone, I should say. And what dopamine actually is what you would consider a pleasurable type of hormone, or it can act like a pleasurable hormone. So, for example, you may eat something sweet, or you've been thinking about getting some ice cream the whole week, and you finally get some, and it may be a ice cream that is loaded with artificial sweetener, or it may not be loaded, but it does have that sweetener in there. So you get that sensation boost and you feel just so liberated. Or you could even get some sweet tea that a lot of people may get, and you may just dose it up with a lot of sugar, and it may just be satisfying to you, and you start to have that release of dopamine. Dealing with artificial sweeteners or just sweeteners, when we think about sweeteners, when most people consume these, of course, they want to get the effects of sugar, but they don't want to get that weight. And what can happen is that most people, they will look to artificial sweeteners as a way of losing weight, a way of dealing with diabetics. So whether you are pre-diabetic or you have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, some people will look at that as a means of trying to go for an alternative. Excuse me. However, on the one end, when you're trying to go for that, let's say you may be satisfied with whatever you may put your sweetener in. So it could be stevia, sucralose, or aspartame. You can put that into like a coffee or even a sports drink, or even if you were baking some cookies, you may say, I don't want to use regular sugar. I want to use a sweetener to see exactly how this will taste. And so you get your cookies. But then what happens when after you eat those cookies, you may be thinking, okay, that was good, but I want more. And so what happens is your brain, that dopamine can continue, and it is a little difficult to manage, especially if you look to this sweetener as, oh, this is a lot better than sugar. And again, that is the argument on one hand. Now going to sugar, going back and forth. And so when you think about sugar, of course, this is going to have more density, more weight. And when you think about a lot of beverages, even cookies, snacks, even candies that are just loaded with sugars, usually added sugars. And I will tell you just briefly, there's a difference between added sugars and sugars that occur naturally. Of course, naturally, you'll think about fruits, and these could be anywhere from berries that contain fiber and as well as the flesh. And then you also have your tropical fruits like your pineapples, your mangoes. And I will say that all fruits are not made the same in terms of how they can be processed in the body. Now, some fruits are more high on the higher glycemic side, and then some, of course, are on the lower end, which means that regardless, they both take some time to break down in your body, and you will have that low level like spike. When it compares to added sugars, this is going to give you an initial blood spike. And so you can think about a roller coaster, you're going up and down, up and down. If you were to eat candies that had added sugar, even a beverage, then you likely will experience that. And what happens is after you get that sensational rush, you are pretty much looking for more because your body is not satisfied. It went through something, it's like, okay, I want more. And again, on both ends, if you were to ask me, are they healthy? Well, it just depends. But I will say, are they nutritious in and of themselves? No. Okay. And that is pretty much the short answer I can tell you. Now, again, I'm not saying that you couldn't use either or, but there are studies that can prove to whether artificial sweeteners as well as sugars are good for you if you're trying to look for an alternative. I will say that with a lot of sweeteners, there is, of course, always developing information, but at least with what I have seen, that some can be related to a lot of side effects, especially long term. So again, if this is short term, may not be that much of an impact. But if you do, keep that in mind, decide to do this long term, so using a lot of sweeteners in your diet, just know that these can implicate or cause there to be side effects that you may start to experience. And you may feel like, hey, I've been eating healthy or doing everything else. But if you continue to have those sweeteners, they can, I know, do several things with your body based off of research. And as I always like to do, at least recently, I do want to share this information with you because I always want you to not take my word for it, but to also see that this is actual information that I'm not just making up. So let me pull this up because, again, I want you to see this information, and because I also want you to be aware of what we are talking about. So that way, if you do have questions, of course, I will answer them, but I also want you to, again, know that I am not making this information up. So let's see. All right. Back to the top. So this is one of the many studies, and it talks about artificial sweeteners and cancer. Now, off the top, don't want you to think that this is linked to cancer, but it just, usually some of these headlines, they kind of preface it in such a way to where they could either be asking the question, do artificial sweeteners have a linkage to cancer? Or artificial sweeteners do have linkage to cancer, and we want to prove why. And so here, like I said, this is one of the many articles that you can look at. But usually what I like to do is I like to kind of go through the studies, and I usually like to go somewhere down at the bottom where they pretty much wrap it up in terms of what was discussed. And so, as you can see here, it says people may use artificial sweeteners to reduce calories, blah, 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 and to avoid overweight and obesity, which have been linked to at least 13 types of cancer. So, again, it's not to say that artificial sweeteners or sweeteners in general do not have a purpose, but it also highlights the overall reasoning for why people do try to go to these additives. And it's because they're usually either overweight, obese, or they're trying to better manage their sugar intake. But again, when it comes to artificial sweeteners, as well as sweeteners in general, this is one thing I want you to keep in mind. It says concerns have been raised that some sweeteners might increase obesity, potentially having an indirect effect on cancer risks. And of course, it talks about how the findings are mixed because in some research, you may see different trends occurring, but however, sometimes the variables, such as how much of the artificial sweetener a person consumes, that is not usually consistent across the board. And so, with a lot of research still developing, and that is something that I keep my eye on. But I do know that there have been at least different studies. This one is pretty much, I won't say biased, but some can actually just tell you straight up that they just don't believe that it is really healthy. And a lot of times, sometimes I do like to ensure that usually the resources that share the information, that they also show the research, because that is one thing I also want you to realize, that when you are ever do decide to do any type of research, is to look through the information to understand, are they biased on a topic, or are they actually sharing some facts with you? And so usually it seems like they do have some articles. And so I will say that for some people, they will provide you with their own take of it. At least from what I have researched, I will say I don't really use artificial sweeteners as well as added sugars, just because at the end of the day, a person may say, well, which is better? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to lose weight, then I probably will say you could go for a sweetener. But long term, I wouldn't really go for both, because they really don't offer you any nutrition or any nutritive value. So you would just do better sticking with the whole foods. Now, I'm sure you may have a question about, well, what about if I use salad dressings or different beverages that are sweet? What should I do if I'm not to use artificial sweetener or sugars? Well, I will say that it does take some time, because if you're used to consuming a lot of sugar as well as sweeteners, then your body as well as your mind is probably so used to getting that effect, or at least that dopamine. You have that certain expectation of, okay, I'm expecting sweetness. But sometimes I will say that there is no, at least if you're trying to be on the healthier path, you just pretty much have to focus on getting more water, even getting more tea. Tea can be very good. Now, of course, it may not be sweet, but it is one of those to where, and when I say tea, I'm not talking about sweet tea, I'm talking about herbal teas. And so these are usually going to provide more health benefits for your body. Some that may be like the chamomile teas, lemon balm, different types of teas. Even they have different herbs, even different fruits that are like in the tea bag, something that you can actually make. And these can also provide you with some benefits. And again, when it comes down to it, again, if you were to ask me which one is better, I would just, the questions that I would ask you is, which one is more nutritive to your body, or has more vitamins and minerals or health benefits that you can actually get. And when you actually compare them, they really don't have any value. Sugar doesn't really have any health benefit. I mean, that is pretty much why on a lot of previous food chains. It was at the top, but I usually like to look at it at the bottom, because sometimes I feel like the food chain can also have a person confused. That's just me. But the way I like to look at things is what is at the top. That is what I focus on. Because that way, when I'm looking at the top level, then I know that, okay, I need to get whole foods. I need to focus. If I do desire something sweet, let me really focus on some fruits and let me really get creative with, okay, how can I really enjoy this without trying to overdo it or add any sugar? Because again, when you add sugar to anything, especially consuming it long term, it's not really good for you. Obesity, which it can lead to, not just the sugar alone, but once it gets into your body, it can convert to fat, because if you don't have a purpose for it, most of the times it converts to fat. Okay. And so you want to keep this in mind. Okay, why do I really need the sweetener? Why do I really need the sugar? What benefit is it really doing for me? Is this just a one-time effect, or is this just something I do just for enjoyment, or is this something that I am looking at to help with my normal diet? And again, these are just questions that can really help you in the long term, as well as with your overall health, because sometimes people just don't ask these questions. But again, you have seen it that I'm sharing this information with you, and hopefully it gives you more insight in terms of, okay, I understand what they are, and I understand, again, there's research out there. It'll tell you about some of that will actually tell you about the articles about artificial sweeteners. Again, some are mixed, but some do provide actual results. And there was one I was looking at today. Wasn't able to pull it up, but I will tell you, at least from looking at it, it did show some interesting results when it came from some clinical trials about women using artificial sweeteners, as well as you during pregnancy. But again, because I don't have it, I don't want to say anything that wouldn't be true. So I would have to have that topic before I comment. But again, these are just some some references that you can check out to really look at. And again, these are just a few that I looked at. I did have actual articles, but wasn't able to pull them up on this computer because I in between computers. But these are at least enough information to help you to really think about, okay, why do I really need to use sweetener or sugar? Like I said, for me, I just don't really use any, or I don't look at any as the go-to, just because when you really have a diet that is really planned out, and again, I'm just the type of person where I can just do it, but I know that there are different people that have to go through it by steps. And so again, not condemning the sweeteners or the sugars, but I'm just sharing that I don't personally consume them as in my typical diet, like adding sugar or adding sweeteners. I don't really do it. But what I will say is I am not opposed to, if it is like a transition for you, then that is something to consider, as well as to talk with your health physician about that. Because with anything, if you do decide to use sweeteners or add sugar to whatever meals, being able to monitor, okay, how much are you adding and what is the timeline for you to decrease it, like little by little. So if you start this week with 10 grams of sugar, then making a plan to say, okay, I'm gonna reduce this down to where I don't even desire to even add sugar. Or even with sweeteners, if you add a packet or even 2 packets, cutting that down to a packet over time, it could be over the course of 2 months, even over a course of a few weeks. The goal is making sure that, okay, the main thing what I'm pretty much getting at is you want to focus on getting those foods as well as those ingredients that are going to be beneficial for your body. Okay. So again, hope that you enjoyed this information. And if you did, make sure you give us a thumbs up, subscribe, please share a comment. I would appreciate that. And again, make sure that you keep up with us at Robody1212. Listen, we got some great topics coming ahead of you. And as well as if you do have some topics that you want to share with us, or you even have questions about, feel free to send it to us because we will definitely address that. And until next time, again, make sure that you follow us at Robody1212. That way you can stay up to date for more information. So until next time, I will talk with you later.